Welcome to this week's Full Court Press. This week we got a blockbuster trade. We had James Harden finally getting out of Houston like he wanted and going to, I think it was his number one destination, the Brooklyn Nets, joining Kevin Durant and Kyrie if ever he gets back on the court. But this deal had four teams involved. Huge thing. Rockets get three players, four first-round picks, four unprotected first-round pick swaps. They got James Harden, and then Brooklyn got James Harden. Pacers got involved. They got a player and a second-round pick. And the Cavs also got involved and traded two players. Drew, you're going to break down the players for us and what you think out of this trade.
Yeah, so let's just get the Pacers and the Cavs out of the way here first, because there's not nearly as much to talk about with these two teams. It was interesting because Victor Oladipo was a guy that when he first got to the Pacers, people were saying that the Pacers, won this huge trade that they had with the Oklahoma City Thunder for Paul George. You had Domantas Sabonis and Victor Oladipo playing great. Oladipo was an all-star, great defender, tremendous defender. All of a sudden, he gets hurt. Was out for a season and hasn't really gotten back to that all-star level that he was at. Still has some talent, and he wanted to sign long-term with the Pacers. He's in the final year of his deal this year. Pacers were not likely to sign him long-term going forward. So the fact that they're able to bring in another pretty good shooting guard in Chris LeVert into that, I think he's going to fit in well with that system. I think it's a good long-term option for them. So, and they got pick compensation back too. I really like what the Pacers did. Not, a major move, not going to shake the standings up a whole lot, but I think the Pacers ultimately improved a little bit for not having to give up a whole heck of a lot.
Yeah.
Cavaliers too. The fact that they're able to add Jaren Allen and Taurean Prince here. Look, we all know that the Cavaliers have a logjam at the 4 and 5 spots, between Jared Allen now and Kevin Love and Andre Drummond. But a lot of these guys, you're going to have the ability to move. Kevin Love obviously doesn't have the trade value that he once did, but there's still a number of teams at the deadline that would love to acquire a guy like Kevin Love to be a really good role player on your playoff team, right? So I still think that this allows them to move some of those other players, get better. Jared Allen's going to be a restricted free agent at the end of this year. I think out of all the players they have in that front court, he far and away has the most upside. Is a double waiting to happen each and every night. Looking at their future, where they have Colin Sexton and Darius Garland, who I believe Kevin Love called Sexland, which is the greatest backcourt nickname of all time. They're starting to have a little bit of talent on that team. And Taurean Prince is no slouch either, solid wing player, very good defender. I just think that the Cavaliers didn't have to get rid of all that much. I mean, Dante Exum, okay, he was playing great defense, but for the Cavs long term,
this is a good move.
huge, great move for them. Small things, but still incremental improvements. Looking at, I'm going to go to, let's hit the Nets first. I think this is interesting because I question to a certain extent. There was talks that Kevin Durant requested this trade before the season started, right? At the same time, I do think that did Kyrie's absence increase the Nets' desire to pull the trigger on this deal? Did it make them more willing to part with the insane amount of draft picks and draft swaps or pick swaps rather that they're going to have to give up? I think the fact that Kyrie was so unpredictable this year, and it was reported, and this is something that I said, a couple weeks back too, they were reportedly concerned about bringing Kyrie on board because of who Kyrie is, and a guy that's just not 100% dedicated to the game of basketball. Tremendous talent. Would never not say that. But Chris Broussard said it this week that right now it does not appear that Kyrie Irving wants to be a professional basketball player. He wants to be a basketball player and a lots of other things too, right? So we'll see what ends up happening there. Nets obviously gave up a ton and mortgaged their future to get this done. But, it's the same thing we said about the Bucks, right? If Harden's there for a decent amount of time, as long as you have KD there, regardless of what happens with the rest of this roster, these picks are not going to be worth a whole heck of a lot. Now, I will say, all of a sudden, what if Kyrie, goes and retires, which is not something that anybody expects to happen, but Chris Broussard again reported that there was speculation in the league that various people who are not in Kyrie's camp, to be fair, but there's a lot of people that would not be surprised if Kyrie stepped away. Kyrie was the guy before the bubble happened. He was one of the first players, if not the first player, to say, "Look, I'm willing to give this all up for social justice causes." I'm going to go on a very small Kyrie rant for a second here, because this is something where I think that ultimately hearing that's something that I truly support Kyrie with. And the fact that you're willing to forgo millions of dollars in contracts and endorsements to fight for social justice causes, I think is great. I defended him last week when he is saying he couldn't focus on basketball because of the events at the Capitol. But then you go, Kyrie, and you throw parties, you're at clubs, and you have pictures with tons of people not wearing masks, and you lose all credibility. And I felt like a huge asshole because I just spent 20 minutes last week defending him for taking a stand on mental health. And then it turns out, oh, maybe you just really don't want to play basketball right now, and you want to hang out with a bunch of people during a pandemic, right? So you can't have it both ways here and be this, highly intellectual, prophet of basketball as this artist, and then also go on these flat earth conspiracies and hang out with a bunch of people without masks on, right? You cannot have it both ways.
No. Yeah, it definitely sorry, just hitting your point of, it seems like it does seem like the Nets wouldn't have pulled the trigger on this trade right now if Kyrie was just full go, no other issues going on. I think definitely you have an inkling that he might not be 100% in mentally or physically, whatever. Yeah. So you pull the trigger on the trade, and if you get 3 years out of Harden and Durant, I think that's a win. You get 4 years, that's perfect because you use all those 4 picks for Harden. Cool. But we'll see. What do you think of the Rockets, though? Or if you had more about Kyrie?
Well, last thing I just wanted to say with the Nets, though, too, is that this was a situation where it makes sense in 2K, right? Where you're just trying to acquire as many stars as possible. There's a lot of people across the NBA. I'm going to mention Chris Broussard again, just because I think he is, one of the best NBA analysts out there. Their games, and we talked about this before the season started when there was trade speculation about him going there. Like, look, Harden is a ball dominant 2 guard. Kyrie's a ball dominant point guard. Kevin Durant can fit into any system that you want him to fit into. But what we have seen historically, whether we can go all the way back to the Chicago Bulls, we can look at the Miami Heat, we can look at the Cleveland Cavs, we can even look at the scoring output of a Draymond Green in Golden State. The third star in a team has their stats reduced, and they are relegated to kind of like an ultra superstar role player, right? I'm not saying that these 3 dudes can't play basketball. They're super talented. They are all individual great players. I am concerned about how they are able to match their games together, especially they have no offseason. Most of these guys don't like to practice. Look how overweight James Harden is right now. Are they going to have enough time in a shortened season to figure everything else out? Because even when you had the Cavs with their big 3, granted, there was some injuries, but they did not win their first year in Cleveland. Miami's big 3, they did not win their first year in Miami, right? They lost to a Dallas Mavericks team that had Dirk Nowitzki, Jason Terry, and like a 40-year-old Jason Kidd, right? It takes time to build chemistry and to build cohesiveness. I'm not convinced that they are going to be able to make that happen. Because even when we look at last year, because you could say, well, the Lakers were able to figure everything out in one season. The Lakers, we all know, AD and LeBron were practicing during the times where they weren't supposed to be practicing, right? Like that's a given. Also, it was such a long season. And then you had the bubble too. Like they had time to actually build that chemistry, and they had a full off season before that happened, right? So it's just a different system now. I'm not convinced that they're going to be able to work together, but on paper, clearly the Nets have the most talent, I think, by far of any other Eastern Conference team. I think that they're probably the favorite based on their talent alone. But looking at how these pieces fit together, I don't think it's a beautiful puzzle. I'm skeptical to see the reality of what this looks like going forward. In the first 2 games that they played, James Harden has totally proved me wrong on this.
I
He's
was
been
gonna
on
say that,
fire.
yeah.
Both him and KD have looked great, even though Harden looks like he ate, Kyrie Irving, and that's why we can't find him. That's such a good joke by me. Harden has still performed well, and the thing with Harden, Charles, he will play himself into shape. He does look significantly more motivated now than what he was. So for the Nets, I don't want it to work. I don't think it's necessarily going to work. But when you just look at talent alone, they have a huge advantage over everybody else in that Eastern Conference.
Yeah.
And they're a great 3-point shooting team, which is where you want your games to be going now, right?
Yeah, he played 40 minutes yesterday against the Bucks, the game that they ended up winning. Harden.
Yep.
So he, may not look like it, but he's in some type of shape.
Yep. And then
yeah.
just lastly, looking at the Rockets here, I am not totally sure how I feel about this deal, right? So you are able. I should say just first and foremost, they had effectively 2 packages. They selected quantity over quality, right?
Yeah.
So what they were still able to get, Oladipo is a solid defender, has potentially still has all-star potential. I'm not sure if he can get back to that level after the injuries, but he's also in the last year of his deal. So I'm not sure how valuable that asset is. You have a couple veteran players that don't mean anything more than just taking up contract space at this time. Sure, I mean, Dante Exum is an elite defender. What does that mean for a Rockets team that's going to be, 13th in the, Western Conference, right? They're probably going to look to move him at the deadline as well. The big thing was that, you have 4 first-round picks and 4 first-round pick swaps. Yes, you got a ton back, but I don't think any of those picks or any of those players are going to get you a whole heck of a lot. It's going to be a lot of bench depth, right?
Yeah, it's 3 from Brooklyn and 1 from Milwaukee, first-round picks. And then the unprotected ones are different. But, those picks aren't going to be super high valuable picks.
And that's the thing. They had the opportunity to go with the quality option where the 76ers, effectively, reluctantly, were willing to, at the end, include Ben Simmons in this package. The Sixers were the only team, really in the entire NBA, that were willing to offer up a blue chipper, a guy that is already an all-star caliber player and could, if he could develop a shot, could be an MVP candidate. They were the only team willing somebody like that in Ben Simmons. And what concerns me about the Rockets is that they didn't do this deal because they thought that this was the best deal for their franchise and moving forward. They did the deal with the Nets instead of the Sixers because Daryl Morey and because of pettiness, right? When Daryl Morey resigned from the Rockets, the idea was that he was going to go on some sort of, 1 or 2 year sabbatical. But 2 days later, he signs with the 76ers. So the last thing Houston wanted was to give Daryl Morey another chance to win a championship with James Harden. Look, I get that, right? I get that you don't want him going to the guy that you just had, and there's, issues there, and you don't want to have that relationship going on. But you ultimately need to do what is in the best interest of your team going forward. Don't care about all this other noise and stuff. The best move they could have made for their team going forward was to acquire Ben Simmons. They didn't do that. And to me, James Harden already screwed so much of this up with the cap, with saying we need to get Chris Paul, then saying we need to get rid of Chris Paul, then Russell Westbrook winning out. Their roster is in such disarray. Their cap is in such disarray. And to not do the most prudent, both financial and skillful move right now, I think says a lot about the current Rockets administration and where they're going. And I don't see them being competitive anytime in the next 5 years.
No, they're going to be a vastly different team. And these picks getting these picks that, like we already talked about, aren't going to be high value picks. So they're going full rebuild in a weird way. And I think we said this at the beginning and going into this season when Harden first came out and said he wanted off. Like, this team needed to commit to the rebuild. They waited. Maybe they got more because they waited. Maybe they got less. But not going for Ben Simmons, if that is true, that just shows that this organization is just going to tear it down and start over, and they're content with that, which sucks for the city of Houston. But Harden has a price.
Has a what?
Price.
Oh.
Yeah. When you start a sentence and you hope you find the way.
Never. For any reason.
Anyways, that was a transition, unless you want to talk about Steve Nash. I was going to type if you wanted to skip that because.
Oh, sure. Can I start or?
Yeah.
Okay. Last thing I just wanted to say about Steve Nash too. There were a lot of different reports that came out, like who were the big winners, who were the big losers of this deal. Ultimately, I'm not sure where I put Steve Nash in that category, right? Because I think to a certain extent, anytime that you can surround a first-year head coach with as many all-star players as possible, you would think it's a good thing, right?
Yeah, you would think.
Looking at the players that they have, especially in Kyrie and James Harden, you have two of the most melodramatic superstars in NBA history, right? Having to figure out a way and a system, and you have Mike D'Antoni there too for what that's worth, who's never won a championship, mind you, nor has Steve Nash, who have all, and that's the funny thing. I mean, bringing James Harden back into this system that he flourished in under D'Antoni. I do wonder how they're going to use Kyrie and him when they're inevitably on the court together at the same time, but maybe it's not as inevitable as Thanos. So we'll see. What I do question with Steve Nash is he, as a first-year head coach, going to be able to bring these wild personalities into play together, especially when their games are so similar? I like Steve Nash a lot. I think he's a great Canadian ambassador for the NBA. But given all the drama they have, given all the drama with the pandemic, and considering he's a first-year head coach and you already had the issues with Kyrie at the beginning of the season, I'm not sold that this is a perfect marriage. But Eric Spoelstra was a very young head coach when he was able to take the Miami Heat into the finals in I believe his first year when they had Wade and Bosh and LeBron there. So we'll see what happens. Nash is a great basketball mind, but if they're going to be playing with the same system that D'Antoni has been using throughout his career, I'm not even sure if that system can win an NBA Finals championship. So it'll be interesting to see.